Recently, I came across a Snopes article that discusses a claim originating with Donald Trump about Sweden. I was shocked at how bad and blatantly dishonest this Snopes article was.
You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible.
For some reason, Snopes decides to summarize this excerpt from Donald Trump's speech as, quote, "Sweden has the highest rate of rape among European countries," end quote. And they rate this claim that they summarized as false. For most of Snopes' article, they ignore the claim that they made up and are ostensibly trying to rebut, and they only get back around to the notional thesis of their article at the very end of it, where they write, quote, "There is simply no data to show that Sweden is the rape capital of Europe, or even that rape is on the rise in the country," end quote. In other words, Snopes didn't find any data comparing the rape rate across Europe, and so they decided the claim that Sweden had the highest rape rate in Europe, they decided that claim was false. They couldn't find any data. So it must be false, right? That's how things work, right? The United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime produces a report called the International Statistics on Crime and Justice. As documented in that report, as of 2006, Sweden did indeed have the highest rate of rape in Europe. You can tell because none of the countries with a higher rate of rape are in Europe. Just because Snopes couldn't find any information, or at least because Snopes says they couldn't find any information, to confirm that Sweden is the rape capital of Europe, that doesn't mean that there isn't any such information out there. I've got some good news for you, Snopes. The United Nations has already found and documented that information for you. Sweden does, in fact, have the highest rate of rape in Europe. Snopes makes the point that different countries in Europe report and aggregate statistics about rape in different ways. So, as an example, Snopes writes that in Sweden, a woman who has been raped 300 times by her husband over the course of a year would go down in Sweden's stats as 300 rapes. Snopes suggests, without providing any evidence for this suggestion, that maybe in other countries in Europe, they would record those 300 rapes as a single rape. Therefore, even though Sweden technically does have the highest rape rate in Europe, it theoretically could be due to how all other countries report and aggregate rape statistics. Now, Snopes is right. This is technically possible. They didn't explore this at all, though. They didn't explore this suggestion or offer evidence to show you that other countries in Europe do aggregate rape statistics in this way that they say they might, but they are right that this statistic is possibly misleading or complicated, depending on how other countries aggregate the data and how Sweden does. However, correctly recognizing that a statistic is complicated and possibly misleading is not the same thing as proving that statistic false. Snopes is staggeringly dishonest by summarizing the true claim that Sweden has a relatively high rate of rape compared to other European countries as false. It's true that interpreting the statistic is complicated because of how different countries report and aggregate statistics, but that does not make the technically true statistic false. Snopes asked for an elaboration from the Sweden Democrats. The Sweden Democrats are a political party in Sweden that support the idea that recent migrants are responsible for an increase in crime, including sexual crimes. The Sweden Democrats, in their response to Snopes, reference a rise in sexual assault that is reported in an annual crime survey that's done in Sweden. Here, I've put some statistics from the annual crime survey for a few relevant fields into a table to make the trend clearer. In 2013, 0.8% of respondents answered the crime survey saying that they had been a victim of sexual assault that year. In 2016, that number was up to 1.7% of respondents. In other words, sexual assault victims have increased by 113% between 2013 and 2016. Now pay special attention to the language in the survey question. Have you been a victim of sexual assault this year? This language means that the objection Snopes makes about rape, that some women might just be getting raped hundreds of times a year and are therefore throwing off statistics for the country, that objection cannot apply here because one woman being sexually assaulted multiple times per year would count only as a single instance, a single person replying that, yes, I have been sexually assaulted this year. The definition of sexual assault did not change between 2013 and 2016. The way of measuring and reporting the statistic did not change, and yet sexual assault victims have more than doubled over this 2-year period. So what could possibly explain a 113% increase in victims of sexual assault in Sweden? What factor could explain this huge rise in sexual assault victims between 2013 and 2016? Well, according to Sweden's migration agency, the peak of Sweden's migrant wave was in 2015. In other words, perhaps it's the arrival of hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers from countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, and Eritrea, among other countries in northern Africa and the Middle East. Perhaps it's the arrival of these hundreds of thousands of young men that are explaining the massive increase in sexual assault. Snopes responds to the point about skyrocketing rate of sexual assault with this, quote, "The claim is misleading for a number of reasons. First of all, the graph does not represent rape, but a wide category called sexual crimes," end quote. And that's the only misleading reason Snopes gives. They never explain what the other so-called misleading reasons are. It's true, technically true, that this particular data point is about sexual assault. This graph is about sexual assault rates over time and not just rape. However, rape is a subset of sexual assaults. That is, all rapes are recorded as sexual assaults. And so if 20% of sexual assaults are actually rape, or whatever that number is, then this graph, the response from the Sweden Democrats Party, the information that I've just shown you, would still represent an increase in rape. That is, 20% of a number that gets larger over time will still be a number that gets larger over time. The Snopes author must just assume that, hey, maybe a smaller percentage of sexual assaults over time are rape. They make that assumption without any evidence or any reason for it. But they assume that, hey, if this is so, then this graph, which shows an increase in sexual assaults over the years, doesn't necessarily mean that rape is increasing. To sum all this up, Snopes takes on the claim that Sweden has the highest rape rate in Europe. This claim is true, even if it's technically complicated. However, Snopes calls it false because they say it's difficult to compare rape rates between countries. This is an absurd amount of intellectual dishonesty. It would be much better to say the claim is complicated or technically true, or it's difficult to assess, or beyond the realm of true or false because it's difficult to compare. But what is not defensible from the standpoint of intellectual dishonesty, what is not defensible is to say that because it's difficult to compare, that the claim is false, especially when it's technically true as borne out by the UN data. Snopes then takes on the related idea that Sweden's booming rate of sexual assault, an increase of over 100% between the years of 2013 and 2016. Snopes takes on the idea that this massive increase in sexual assault is related to Sweden's recent admittance of hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers from northern Africa and the Middle East. Snopes shows the source documents from the Swedish Democrats, which prove that sexual assault is dramatically increasing in Sweden. And here I mean, by source documents, I mean the Swedish Crime surveys, which show that sexual assault is increasing. And Snopes goes on to claim that this is misleading, and they don't ever give a good or even an intelligible reason why it's misleading to simply look at the sexual assault figures and notice that they are increasing by a massive amount, by over 100%. Snopes is absurdly dishonest in this article. Their lazy investigation is shockingly stupid. Do not trust Snopes. If you cannot trust them here, that implies that you cannot trust them anywhere. If you enjoyed this video, then please let me know by clicking the like button. If you'd care to see more videos in a similar style, then go ahead and click subscribe. Thanks for your time.